Okay, we are live. Should start coming through.
I'm just gonna say on my Discord that I'm gonna announce it that I'm in this podcast. So this is my first ever type of podcast. So
Yeah. All right. Let's hope I'm sounding all good. Um, but yeah, let's wait for people to come in. Make sure the sounds are all right. Do you want to quickly say something, Daniel? Just sort of.
hello, 1 2 3 test.
Yeah, that about does it, honestly. Yeah, it's not like making a video where you can just, do some noise suppression and all that, you know.
Yeah, I hope there's not too much background because it's also funny that everyone at my house decided that today's a great day to remodel some bathrooms.
Yeah.
So don't even ask. Like I don't know where this even came from. I didn't get any warning. I just heard hammers and drills going. I'm like, well, I guess.
Yeah, well, like for me it's like 10 p.m., so everyone's gone upstairs, so I'm all good now. I got like
Oh,
free time, which is great. Well, that is
yeah.
until I fall asleep.
I always say I'm gonna work on my game for a while at night or do homework and do something productive at night, and then it like hits that time and I'm just out.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Wait for people to say whether or not they can hear us, and then we can actually start because we're starting to get some people streaming in. Ha!
There we go.
No pun intended.
Uh, but how did you actually get into doing this podcast? Like any inspirations for starting it?
um. Well, before I started it, I had attempted at doing a podcast with a friend of mine, and I really enjoyed it. But like it never really took off. And then I started
Hmm.
doing game dev, and like I realized that actually, game development is quite a cool thing to talk about. And
Hmm.
I searched around looking for like game dev podcasts, and there's not really too many. There's quite a few, but there's not that many. Like back when I started, there was barely any. And I started in January 2019, so it's been a couple of years since I started. But yeah, no, it's just been like when I first got the first guest I got was Blackthorn Prod, and then I
Hmm.
was like, okay, this is definitely what I want to do, and then I ended up doing it for 2 years somehow. Almost 40 episodes in. It's kind of crazy,
Yeah,
but yeah.
I know back in the day, I think it was last summer, I was actually looking to find a good like game dev podcast to get into while I was just like doing my things. And I never could find like a good one. All of them were like bad quality or not. I mean, I might have not been looking at the right places, of course. So,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
feel like this is the one that I found that's actually like really well made and put together. So good job on that.
It's really weird to hear that. I don't know. I never really think of it as like really well put together and stuff, but I mean, if you think so. But yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
As
people are in
I
now, uh so can everyone hear us all right? We don't sound trash,
Oh,
hopefully.
hey, Dennis is in here. We're fueled by caffeine. He's in my Discord as Dennis, so I just call him Dennis everywhere. But then I forget that his actual name is fueled by caffeine.
Yeah, I have that. Like I have some friends that that come into the stream and I'll just refer to them by their name and people are like, who are you referring to, you know? Yeah. You guys sound great? Yes. That is a first time. That's never happened. All right.
Oh, it's
Um,
great.
so welcome everyone to Indie Dev Chat episode 37. I'm here with Daniel from Hyve. Hello, Daniel. How are you doing?
Good. I'm doing great. So,
Awesome.
it's my first podcast, so I just want to say welcome to everyone who's here. Glad to be on here.
Yeah, this is my 37th. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about procedural animation and game flow, as you can see in the title, and hopefully we'll also be touching on level design. Not too sure yet, but yeah. So first off, Daniel, would you like to introduce yourself and what you do, who you are?
Yeah, I am. My name is Daniel. I am the head developer of Windshire. I also edit all the videos, voice edit, write all the devlogs for Hive. I'm also the team manager, and I just do a bunch of stuff there.
Mhm.
I'm really glad to be on this podcast. It's I've watched a few of them, and I just love the way they're made.
Is this just gonna be a compliment stream, just like
Yeah,
flooding them
honestly,
in?
hey, you gotta give out you gotta be positive
Yeah,
sometimes.
yeah, no, no, I
So
completely
much.
appreciate it. But yeah,
Yeah.
so I think it's quite interesting, because I found you my recommended ages ago. Like I'm talking, this was a while back. Like it was an early episode of Windshire, I remember. Um, but I never really sort of knew that you were in a bigger team until like a few episodes in, and I went into like on your website and stuff. And yeah, it is really quite interesting. That you say that you're like a team manager, a lead developer, and stuff like that. Because that's the same as me. It's kind of weird because like, not many people are really like, there's not really a lot of like other developers that are out there that are in like a sort of studio like this and doing content creation. You know what I mean? Like you don't
Yeah.
see it that much. So it is interesting to see for sure. But yeah, Tom's just said when you have things to do but watch streams instead. That is very true.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, but it's just really great seeing like other team managers like to talk to because I don't think I've ever really spoken to that many on the podcast. But yeah, so I guess my first question for you is how did the team come to be? Like what were your steps?
I feel like the reason, well, I kind of went into this into one of my recent videos, but one of the reasons I kind of started this whole team was because I felt like Windshire got so overscoped that like I just couldn't do it without a team, but I also really wanted to have a team. So in my video, I kind of said that like if your game that you feel like you need a team, just quit it. Like I I didn't want to just quit a game I was passionate about, so I started going on Discord servers like Bracky's the server, not the game jam. I went into the Game Dev League, I believe that's the Discord name, and they have these channels that you can kind of advertise your project and see if you can get some people on board.
Hmm.
And I never thought my game was anything that special. The art was something I was pretty proud of at that time,
Yeah.
but I just posted a few things with some screenshots, and I got a quite a bit of people actually interested in helping me out. So that was pretty surprising, and I just kind of talked to a few. And there's been team members that I've gotten that have left, and I've had to replace them with other people, which is something that come and goes when you have
Yeah.
kind of a larger team.
Hmm.
But I feel like I was really lucky that I also had a small Instagram following at that time, which I posted out, and I asked a few people if they were interested in joining, and they were, and that's kind of where I started to grow. Recently, the last team members I've gotten were actually from Reddit. There's a few subreddits that you can post your game and look for team members, and I've done that, and there's some good success there. So if you're
Yeah.
looking to get your team members, I would suggest Reddit and Discord servers.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I feel like that's kinda just where the team started, and I just love the dynamic of just working with someone else, and when you go to
Yeah.
sleep or you can't work on the game, you wake up and someone's like, "Hey,
Oh,
I
that
got this
yeah.
all
No,
done."
I can completely
Yeah,
empathize with that. It's so good. Like just especially when you're working with. So I'm working with someone who's in China. So when I go to sleep, I wake up. There's like this new thing that's been added. I'm like, wow.
I
It is really great.
Yeah, like this week especially, I've had my ACT, which is like if you're in the US, that's like a big test to get into college and just to graduate high school in general. So I've been kind of slacking on game development until the last few days. But
Mhm.
then I woke up and Dennis or Fueled by Caffeine was like, "Oh hey, I got this whole new thing implemented. I don't want to go into it yet because we're not going to show it just yet." but he's like, "Hey, I got this all done," and I'm just like, "Wow!" Even though I haven't done anything, you've done this, and then same thing with my sound effects engineer. Uh, I s- he's been on the team for a while, but I'm always so scared to pronounce his name just because it's Deaux, but he goes by Do. So I always have to sit there and think for an extra second. But he started getting sounds into the game, which is just super impressive just to like wake up because sounds is something I struggle with the most.
Yeah, yeah.
But he goes from like actually creating the sounds and implementing them and just waking up to that is just amazing.
Oh, that is the best feeling. Like, um, yeah, sound effects are one of those things that, and same with artwork. Like when you see that added to the project, it's like, oh hell yeah, you know,
Yeah,
like when it's programming and systems and stuff, especially when it's back end, it's less not necessarily less rewarding, but like you don't get as big of a like motivation boost as when you see like a new art asset come in or a new sound effect be implemented. It is
yeah.
there's nothing that compares to it. Like we're using Fmod for this project, or we will be using it when we get to the sound stuff. But yeah, I can't wait for that to be like implemented because it's just it's gonna be so good waking up to sound effects in the game.
I have been working on my game for it's over 2 years now actually, and we just started getting in like a lot of sound effects in, and we're using Wise,
Mm.
and it's just like finally hearing your game with audio is
Oh,
just a different
it
level.
adds a complete of the
Yeah,
dynamic, doesn't it? Yeah, it's crazy.
yeah. Now that like in my testing scene, I don't have audio in, and it just feels so much different than with audio.
Yeah, yeah, no, most definitely. Um, Tom has a question regarding working in a team. He said, "How did you handle the contract side of working in a team? That's one of the main reasons I can't be bothered to have anyone join me. I don't want to deal with contracts. Lol."
So this is kind of a funny touchy subject for
I
me.
guarantee you're gonna say the exact same thing I'm probably gonna say. Go on.
I haven't really looked into contracts too much.
Yeah, no, no, I'm sorry. I completely. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, so I haven't we've had a contract in the write-up for a while now, and we've almost been finished with it. And it goes through a lot of the actual legal stuff because we had one of our team members, his fiance was actually a lawyer. So she agreed to make a contract for us, and we it was going all great, but then they kind of a lot of them had to step down, so the contract was never made. So we kind of just go by off a trust factor. Kind of, we're just like
Yeah,
we won't steal each other's stuff, and it's
yeah.
been working for quite some time.
Yeah, the way we have it done is like we split the team into like two segments sort of. So me and the person that works in China, the my I guess my business partner in a way. We are the ones that actually have access to the Unity project. Whereas like the sound effects people that usually the sound effects people they change quite regularly. I find like I'm not sure if you found this, but like they'll do maybe one soundtrack, maybe a couple of sound effects, and then some of them most likely will leave afterwards. And like you can't really trust that, like put a trust on their shoulders with with that sort of
Yeah,
stuff. Because if they run away with the project, that's not great. But another
yeah,
thing that we do that I actually haven't got the others to sign yet, which it's just reminded me. We've got like some really basic NDAs set up so that people can't just go ahead and talk like about the project unless we talk about it through like our YouTube channel and stuff, which definitely sure it doesn't like really protect your intellectual property that much. It at least makes sure that you know stuff you don't want to get announced yet doesn't get announced sort of
yeah,
thing. Um,
yeah,
but the contract thing is definitely something we probably need to think about more. But for right now, the problem is that like nobody really earns money yet, and I think that's like the biggest thing with a contract is that they're not actually employed technically because
yeah,
they don't earn any money. Like none of us do yet, and it's I guess like a revenue share agreement would probably be the best. But yeah, we'll definitely need to set that up, which is probably something I'll probably do, because now I actually own the company, so I probably need to
Mhm.
get round to that now. Um, but yeah, um,
Tom Willen just asked, do you have a rev share or payment agreement, or is everyone just helping you for free? Well, I don't like saying they help me for free. I like saying they're volunteers, okay? So
yeah, no, that's how we
we
have it as well. Yeah,
we like saying it, oh, we like using your time for free, but give you a title to make you happy. No, I'm kidding. We don't have necessarily because everyone's again not making any money.
hmm
And I laid it out in the front that this project is really big and that rev share will be a given, but you're gonna need to be there at the end of the project,
yeah,
and everyone kind of understood that. So I have a rough idea. I've talked to people about their rev share and what they think is fair. But once we get closer to release, we're going to be making a actual document
yeah,
saying
yeah,
like, and it's not just I mean this is I guess what rev share is kind of just like based upon how much you actually did in the project is kind of what we're going to be basing it
yeah. No,
off.
that's the same for us. Like, one thing that I'd suggest to you, there's this thing called Toggle. It's a time tracking software, and it allows for people to, track their work time, and obviously, time translates to money usually. So, like, having that as a good metric to show how much a person has put in, and comparing it to like, everyone else getting the average sort of thing, usually helps quite a lot. But like, yeah, that's something that we're doing this project, because it was a mess with our last game, so we're not making the same mistake.
Hopefully my project won't be like that. I don't know what happened, but I feel like I have some pretty level-headed people right now that I
Yeah,
feel like once we get to that step, we kind of will all sort of understand. It also helps that a lot of people who do help me have their own jobs or internships.
yeah,
So it's not like they're relying on me or the rev share at the end to pay for stuff.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
more
yeah.
like a benefit.
Yeah, I think
And
that's the biggest point with like volunteer work, if you would call it that, is that it's just something they can do on top of what they're already doing. And a good way to gauge whether or not someone's actually suitable is like seeing, okay, what job are they actually doing? Like how much time do they actually have to commit to the project, and making sure
yeah,
you know that, because obviously you can't just like judge someone's work, like on something, if they can only do it like 3 hours a week or something. Which if someone
mm,
can only do 3 hours a week, you probably need to look into that a little bit. But
yeah.
I suppose it does depend. But yeah. So I guess rolling on from that, because that wasn't even a topic that we somehow, drifted onto. So what should we start with? Level design, game feel, procedural animation. Are there any like first statements you want to bring out yet, or about any of them?
One of the things I actually watched a video by Codier. I know a lot of people saw his first devlog. He kind of a lot of his game is about procedural animation, and I just find it interesting from like I started hearing about procedural animation in like very few topics or games, and then it just blew up all of a sudden, and
Yeah.
people are like, if you don't have procedural animation, your game is just not good.
hmm
And like I've heard that from some people, and it's just interesting how it's an interesting mechanic, but the hype around it is just crazy.
Yeah. No, I would definitely agree. I don't think, you know, I think it can add to a game for sure, but it definitely depends on the game that you're making, right? Like, for games like made by, I guess the most notable developers would probably be like Naughty Dog and stuff. Their procedural animation is like, as you're walking past a wall, your character's arm usually like goes up against the wall, like stuff
Yeah.
like that are things that they usually do. And the whole feet like reacting to the incline of the floor and stuff like that. But it is definitely a question of whether or not like it's worth the time and energy as an indie developer. And it completely depends on what your project is and what it's all about. Because I think if you're also an indie studio, it's a lot harder to dedicate your resources to something like that if you're trying to get the gameplay down. I think it should be procedural animation is probably something that you could add as like a extra grain of salt once the game is mostly in place. I'd say, but I guess with Coder, his whole thing is that his whole game centers around it. So
Yeah.
I think that's a big takeaway from his game is that that is what makes his game stand out so much. Um, I'm not sure if you've seen like on Twitter and stuff. There's been like a gecko, like the
Oh, I have.
yeah, the
Yeah.
gecko with the procedural animation. That's the other one that comes to mind.
Mhm.
But like that, those two games, the reason they're getting so much attention isn't necessarily because of the procedural animation. It's because it's like that is its main focus. If you know what I mean. Like I don't know. I mean, I have no
Yeah, I
idea.
get that. I'm not gonna say that those games are getting popular because of procedural
No,
animation,
exactly, exactly.
but I feel like some people are interpreting it like that and thinking if they add procedural animation into their game is gonna blow up,
Yeah,
which I strongly disagree with. I
yeah,
love procedural animation as a system, and I've been interested in learning it, but like I haven't figured out, or I haven't even thought of a good way to implement something like the gecko or like the other one is like a giant worm into my game. Like just some games just do not fit procedural animation. I
yeah,
feel like
yeah.
that has to be one of your game design pillars or one of the things you're trying to achieve with your game
Mm-hmm.
if you want to add those types of
Yeah,
enemies
yeah,
or things like that. So,
yeah. No, most definitely. Like those games that not necessarily the reason they're good, but you know, the procedural animation is what they've gone for from the get go, right? Like that is
yeah.
clearly what they want. It's like a style, an artistic style, isn't it? Really, it's like
Yeah.
you know it's definitely if I think the problem is that developers, as Madbook has just said in the chat, he said I think procedural generation is currently something that feels new and fresh for people to look at, which I think is most definitely true for
Yeah.
procedural animation. Is that developers, especially newer developers or just consumers stuff like that, when they look at like procedural animation, it's a new thing, and that's people love new. It's like eye candy, right? Like if they see something new, they'll like immediately gravitated towards it. But I feel like if every game did procedural animation, it'd then become the norm to do it in every developer's game, and I think that would be a really, really bad idea.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't like it's just that goes back to like not every game needs this cool and new feature. Like it's cool to look at, but then if you just it's like you can make something look nice on a screenshot, but then gameplay if you try to play it and it just doesn't work and you're trying to force a new feature such as procedural animation just because it's new, fresh and it's getting popular,
Yeah,
then it's actually gonna do the opposite for when, your game releases or you get playtesters and they're like, "Why would you add this type of system?" It feels tacked on,
yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah,
that I feel like that's what a lot of game devs are just not really, thinking about right now, is like, I see a lot of games that are like, "Yeah, I added the robots to have procedural animation," or, "I added this and that," and I'm like, "That's cool, it looks nice, but what does it add
yeah. And
to the
how
game?"
long did it take you to make? And
Exactly.
how much fixes are you going to need to do to it to get it perfect? Like the moment you add a new system, whether that's programming, animation, all of that, the moment you add something new to the game, you need to factor in the fact that if something goes wrong with it, you then have to dedicate resources to that. And if you're working solo, especially, like, is it really the best idea to have all the enemies and the character having procedural animation as
Yeah.
well as, whatever else? just because you've seen it done before. Like, sure, if it's like the whole artistic style is made for it, then I guess that makes much more sense. But if initially you don't want that for your game, then I'd say just don't go for that for your game, right?
Yeah, that's kind of where I stand on it. Is like if you're not ready to put in a lot of effort into it and just kind of put it like just tack it onto your game, don't do it.
Yeah,
Like,
because if there's bugs with it, people then are gonna look at it a lot worse, and it's gonna
yeah,
have a much bigger impact. Like, AAA games, they have many resources. They have so much money to spend on all this sort of thing, and procedural animation would take like a week for someone to implement. Like it's just, and especially for like the Uncharted games, again, Naughty Dog, because I think they're quite a good example for procedural animation. They use procedural animation to tell a story within the environment. Like it gives a sense of mystery because you're literally like, I guess I don't know how to explain it, but it gives you a sense of mystery when you're playing as the
yeah.
character. Whereas, if you're playing a first person shooter, why do you have procedural animation? It's like, what does that do? Yeah,
But hold up, on that topic though, there hasn't been a first-person shooter procedural animation, so that might be a good thing to look into if you want a unique game.
maybe. But like,
I'm just,
well,
yeah.
there has
Yeah.
been for like the enemies, right?
Well, yeah, for the enemies,
Yeah,
I'm just saying, like, kind of jokingly, if you want to do a procedural animation, like
yeah,
you got to do something that's unique
yeah,
about it
yeah,
if
yeah.
you want it. Because I think with Codier's game, a
It,
lot of people have seen the procedural animation done in a prototype, but they might have not seen a full game with colors, the nice art style, and all of that put together. And I feel like that's a huge thing for him that's going for him is that his art style, I personally really like it. And with procedural animation, it just fits.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, as Jack just said, Obaji, he said totally accurate. Battlegrounds uses procedural animations, and the reason that game uses it is because it's essential for the game. The whole thing is that you're playing as a ragdoll character, and
Yeah.
that's what makes it stand out. And same with like, Human Fall Flat. That's procedurally animated because it kind of needs to be, because if it wasn't, it
Yeah.
would be really weird. Like just some really like just normal walking characters. It wouldn't add to the ragdolly feel. Um,
Yeah.
and I think Gang Beasts as well is another like good example. It adds to the, I guess, floppiness, if that
Yeah.
makes
Like the
sense.
goofiness of the
Yeah,
game.
yeah, yeah. And maybe for our game it might be something that we look into a little bit, because again, we do want to have like the effect of goofiness add onto the
Yeah.
game, but at the same time it's like, do we really need it to add to the game, or would it just sort of, again, like be tacked on?
Yeah, I feel that because like when I started seeing all of this, I was part of that thing. I'm like, oh, what if I add it to my game? And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, what would it add to the game? And
Yeah,
then this was around the time where I'm like, why add procedural animations where you can add just a few ragdolls? And I
yeah,
mean, it's not the same thing, of course, but it adds that goofiness that maybe
exactly.
procedural animation you want to achieve with it. So I feel like there's other options that take less time, but might have the same effect that you might need it for.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah, Madbook actually just rightfully said, procedural animations can also just save time if you have a good workflow with it. Like, instead of manually animating a bunch of stuff, you can set up your characters or enemies to handle any something you throw at them. Yeah, no, most definitely. I think if you have a good workflow and you've got your own workflow for it, I think that's the most important part, is making sure it stands out, because if you have a workflow that you've copied from the internet, it's gonna become very, very obvious. And
Absolutely.
I suppose some procedural animation, like for the characters, like getting that from the internet maybe won't be as big of an issue because a character doing procedural animation isn't you know like
Yeah.
I don't know how to explain it, but for something like enemies and stuff, if they're not humanoid and stuff like that, if they're like some other character, if they look the same as something people have seen before, and it doesn't add anything, and it just you know doesn't doesn't really do anything to them, then it's not
Yeah.
really worth adding. Um, but I guess it's a really weird topic because it can definitely be something that can add a lot, but at the same time, if you do it badly, it can like reduce a lot from your game. Um,
Oh yeah.
but yeah, no, I think we should definitely move on from that to game feel because I think they work quite well hand in hand together. The whole thing with procedural animation is that it does add a lot of game. It can add a lot of game feel because you're again the whole point of game feel is making the player feel like they're making more of an impact on the world, and the environment around them. And procedural animation is obviously going to do that because now they feel like they're a part of the environment. Um, but yeah, like I don't know. Is there anything you want to say about game feel in particular?
Feel is something I feel like I personally struggle with the most
Mm,
is I can make the I can make the player, but getting the AI to just feel perfect and feeling like when because I think of game feel as sort of I guess you can call it game juice at the same time,
yeah.
kind of. So I think adding game juice and it's kind of the most important thing that can either make or break a game. And that's why I've spent months on end like researching, looking at different AI systems, seeing how enemies interact. Because
Hmm.
if I feel like with 90% of my game being combat and interactions,
Yeah.
if I don't nail that perfect feeling of hitting an enemy or perfectly like when the a barrel explodes, the enemy interacts a certain way, if you don't do it correctly, I just feel like your game could just become a flop
Yeah.
because it's so easy to mess game feel up by adding too much or by adding too little that
Hmm.
you need to like focus on what actually makes your type of genre fun to play and fun to click those buttons because at
Yeah.
the end of the game a, a game is just you clicking buttons and something on a computer happening.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And it's just making the player feel like when they press those buttons, like the left mouse click or the right mouse click, that it feels like they've done something. Like
yeah.
it same goes with like responsive UI and stuff. If I have a game or if I play a game and like I click on a button, if it doesn't show me that I clicked the button, that sort of
Yeah.
it feels really awful. Like
Yeah, it's like the game, it's like, did I click it? Did I not click it? Should I
yeah,
click
yeah,
it
yeah.
again? But
Exactly.
then when you add in that like the button changing colors, that sound effect to show that you or to so you can hear some audio feedback,
Hmm.
it just fixes stuff. And I know
Yeah.
Madbook, I don't mean to cut you off, but I just have one more thing to add to
I'll
that is
go
that
for it.
Madbook made a video about it and he talked about how this chess game online had like the perfect amount of game feel where when you move a chess piece, it just makes a simple sound effect, but that simple sound effect was just enough to make the game fun. It was not too much or too little.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess like with a chess game, if you have a chess piece sound, it would immerse you into feeling like you're actually playing chess, right? Like
Yeah,
I think that's another thing is that game feel should help immerse the player, right? Because at the end of the day, games are mostly used as as an escape from the real world, right? So making it so the player can fully delve into whatever environment they're in is super important. Um, but yeah, like game feel is one of those things that's really difficult to nail, especially for games like was it like a third person shooter or whatever it may be. It's really difficult to nail game feel for some certain games, especially indies. You have a lot less resources out there to get something that feels great. Like with AAA titles, they can add like a muzzle flash and there you go. And they can make it look really good because they know what they're doing. Whereas indies, a lot, especially at the start, you don't really know how a gun should necessarily feel. Whereas these AAA titles, they've maybe had many, many, many years of experience with it, or they've had like research into gunplay and how guns work, all the projectiles and stuff, and it's definitely difficult to rival with those. But I think indies have this sort of added thing with game feel that they can make it seem unique in a lot of ways. Like AAA titles, they often follow the same sort of pattern. I find with game feel, it's always like shoot an enemy. They usually like spurt a bit of blood and then they die, sort of thing. That's it. Whereas indies, we could make it so you shoot an enemy and then they shoot confetti out of everywhere, sort of thing. It immediately has added loads of impact and it's unique as well.
I think that's the one thing about being an indie that is also really magical about being indie rather than uh triple A. I talked to one of my programmers a few weeks ago about adding this certain system,
Hmm.
and he talked about how much resources they'll take and if it's worth it. But then you got to look at it from the other side that you're an indie dev and adding these types of features to help the game feel better is like the creative liberty you have because you don't have those investors, you don't have those people
Yeah,
trying to make money and get the game out.
yeah,
So if you really want a system in, you can spend those 1 or 2 months making it perfect. Whereas if you were like a triple A studio, it was just like, oh, we'll put that on the shelf and maybe look at it in the next what do you call it, year or the next game we make.
yeah. Like, yeah, Tom Wines just said, I think indie devs have an easier time putting their personality into their games, which is very true. Like AAA
Yeah.
games, they all feel like they're pretty much not necessarily the same, but like they feel like they're just normal, right? Like they don't really stand out, but the reason AAA games do so well is usually because they have tons of investment and they have so many employees doing all of it and they know what makes a good game. They've been doing it for decades sometimes even, whereas indies, most of us have only been doing it only a little bit, especially commercially. It's not a huge thing for some of us. And yeah, I think we have a certain flair for game development, and game feel really allows us to unleash our creativity to the fullest extent. And we can really think up unique ways that AAA titles don't really have the luxury of doing. We can do just pop sounds here and there, and when you interact with an object, and immediately you've made a really interesting effect. Whereas AAA games, they're not gonna do like a pop sound effect because that doesn't sound AAA. You know,
Uh,
like most of their sound effects would be like something that someone's recorded like 50 times over, edited 50 times, and
Layered on top of each other to make different sounds.
yeah, exactly. They know what they're doing, whereas we also know what we're doing in a different way, and I think that's important. Like Tom has just said, AAA companies know how to make their games addictive, which is very true, and that's because again they know how to do that, and they're thinking like a corporate company would. They're not necessarily thinking like an indie game would, where we think of the players and how the community will react, whereas AAA companies usually are in it for the money. Usually, not all the time, because there are definitely outliers in that, but usually it's just to make as much money as they possibly can, um, in however which way they can, yeah. But yeah, like combat games, especially your game with the whole sword combat and stuff like that. I dread to think how difficult that is. Like the close quarters attacking and stuff must be a real, really quite difficult to work with.
Feel like everything you bring up is just considered a touchy subject for me, but this one especially is it hits me because like I go to bed, I'm like the combat is just not good enough. It's just not there yet because though like I said I can make it look good in the video, I always have this feeling of like there's something not there and like if you don't get every little thing in a combat system close quarters working correctly, it feels really buggy. If that enemy interacts or tries to block your attack point 0.1 seconds after you already hit it, it feels buggy. It doesn't feel fun. If it blocks too early, it feels unfair. If the enemies attack too much, it's kind of unfair. If they don't attack enough, it feels like there shouldn't be there.
Yeah.
So doing like it's just so many small things you have to tweak and continuously go back to, and that's why a lot of my devlogs they kind of overlap in the topics I talk about. Like I go back to combat and melee animations a lot. Like I either change them up, give them different combos, or I do something just to make it a little better.
Hmm.
Like every week I feel like I at least spend a solid day just improving combat a little bit and I still don't think it's there yet.
Yeah. 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 No, it's. I feel like that's something that we're gonna have to really wrangle when it comes to a bit later in the project, especially like a third person shooter. Like one thing that I've already found is that the game feels too slow, and I'm like, oh god, I know this is gonna be a thing that's gonna be reoccurring the whole way through development
Yeah.
because yeah, like the problem with ours is that the movement speed is too slow, but if you make it faster, it's unmanageable. So we have to I guess we'll have to shrink a level, but if we shrink a level, then it reduces the openness of the level, and then if we reduce the openness, it kind of defeats the purpose of the game. There are so many things to look for, and already I'm like, oh god.
It's always the main mechanics that have these
Yeah.
issues. I feel like it's never that like one system that someone barely will use. No, it's like the main attraction to your
Yeah,
game.
yeah, yeah.
And if like you change one variable, then there's like this, and that all get changed. And it just like it's such a balancing act for me. It's like super tedious, and I'm like considering I'm like maybe just say it's good enough and move on. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what I've done because for the last 2 years, I've probably redone movement and combat at least 4 times. Like, it's
Yeah.
all
Yeah,
um,
that's
it's
that's something I'm not looking forward to because I already know we're gonna have to rework the movement about 50 times until it's properly there. Yeah. But I think that's also kind of the fun bit of game development in like in a weird way is that you're making these constant tweaks and stuff and trying to get it to perfection, which it probably never will do, but like you get it as close as you can, and I think that's what makes it quite fun is that like you've always got this thing that you need to work on and try and sort out all the time, and I think having that in the back of your mind, even though it is really overbearing, it really adds to the whole game development process. Like it really drives you to want to keep working on that and make sure that you can get it as perfect as you possibly can. Um, but yeah, no, it as you said, it's always the it's always the main mechanics that are the problem. Never the small systems. No,
yeah.
yeah,
No, and that's kind of what I love about game dev is, like, you have this problem that you just keep changing and affecting, and then one day you do something to just complete like the smallest change, and then it just changes the whole feel of the game to the exact thing you want. And I've recently felt that is that I've been working on combat and stuff, but I've been so like I guess you could say so deep into the combat changing variables, I never just like sit back and enjoy the combat
yeah,
myself. But recently with working on different systems like something that's coming up actually, I have a devlog releasing after this podcast which talks about status effects, is something I've been working on for the last few days, and it just let me enjoy combat with the way that the enemies can be caught on fire with campfires and that way. And it's like all of this like interesting systems that you work on, but then you go back to combat and you just try to have a 1v1 against one of the orcs, and you realize that maybe it's not as bad as you thought when you were headfirst into it. It's like you need a clear mind to work on these systems, and maybe taking a
Yeah.
break is better than just trying to change that point oh 0.01 to point oh 0.02 and seeing if it's better like
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah. No, most definitely. Yeah, Madbook's just said one of the best ways I've found to deal with that is to watch people play your game. And yeah, I would definitely agree. Watching people playtest is really valuable. And, you know, playtesters in general are lifesavers, and getting them as early on as you can is like, I can't stress enough how important that is to really get down. Like, you gotta get it down once you literally have one system in place, you got to get someone else to test it. Like, even if it's like just one thing, it is super important that that one thing is done right, and you just keep it consistent and stuff. And then you get a really good game out, and eventually when you get to that point. Um, and yeah,
Yeah,
Madbook again has just said trying to tell if a system is fun when you know exactly how that system logically operates is like impossible. Exactly. Yeah.
I felt that so many times. Like, it's like the reason on some of my older videos combat looks really fun or sort of fun, and some people have said the combat looks really fun, but I know that the only reason that AI, now looking back on it, looked that good is because I knew how that system operated. So I can basically script out how those encounters would look like on video to make them look a bit better, which sounds really messed up, but it's not like I'm doing it on purpose. It's more like I'm doing it because that's how my vision of the AI would work. But since I know how that AI works, it's like, what's the point of making the AI roll backwards if I know to roll back at this moment and that's how I want the game to play?
Yeah, yeah. No, as Excelsior Studios has just said, all the hacks that make it work, so it's hard to truly enjoy it. It's a curse and a blessing. That's why a lot of
Yeah,
companies have combat designers who don't touch the code at all and just test the feel. Yeah. It's
now
a
that's
it's a weird experience, like trying to get it perfect when in the back of your mind it's never going to be perfect, because you can't there isn't perfect in game development anywhere. Like,
something.
someone's
Oh,
going
you,
to dislike it at one point and someone's going to love it at one point. It's just the curse of game
and that's
development.
something I feel like I still gotta learn because I strive for perfection and
Yeah.
would consider myself a perfectionist where I will not release a build of my game until like I am super happy with it,
Mhm.
even though that's terrible for the design of it. Like, um, I used to release builds every single month, even if a system wasn't fully finished. I would just release it and let it go. But recently, with the game getting a lot bigger, I've felt like if I don't get this game to look perfect or play perfect before I get a build out, then I would disappoint so many more people, and a lot of people would kind of lose respect in that game, and that kind of what I feel like a lot of game developers kind of start to feel. And I know there's this one game I'm gonna kind of bring from a little history is Cube World. It was a passion project where he released the alpha. It got so big that he kind of became a perfectionist, and it took him what 6 years to release the game, and now he's getting hate for it. And it's
Yeah.
just like that's what I'm worried of is like I release a game that isn't completely finished or the systems aren't fully tested by
Mhm.
me and I like them, then the game is just gonna flop.
Yeah, yeah. It's definitely that's a really difficult thing to combat. Like, just getting it as good as you possibly can is easier said than done, because you think that what you possibly can is is the best sort of thing.
Yeah.
Whereas you it's a weird thing. Like, I think the problem that Cuboid probably had was that it didn't seem like there were many testers for it necessarily. So they sort of suffered from the game not being well tested, and when
Yeah,
it came to people playing the game, they were like, what is this? Because I
yeah,
think, when you are a perfectionist for your own game, if you spend too much time on one thing, then everything else gets left behind. And if you, at the same time, if you're focusing on the logical stuff of that like system or whatever it is, it comes to playing the game and the actual feel of that system doesn't feel good, and yet you feel like you got the logical system correct, right? And
yeah.
it's a weird juggling act because I feel like it's like sometimes you need to have the logical system not as, how do I say it, like not as perfect, if that makes any sense, because I feel like
Yeah.
if you get it super perfect, then it can sometimes feel like it's too perfect. If you know what I don't know. It's a really weird
Yeah.
thing to explain.
No, I kind of get that. It's kind of like when you're trying to put like a picture frame in the very center of a wall. There's this like theorem where it's like to the numbers, it's completely perfect. Like it is right in the center, but then our eyes kind of don't see it as being in the center. So there's kind of like that disconnect between real numbers and what we see and what we feel. So I feel like you can have the system completely logically like perfect, but then when you play test it, it isn't perfect or it's so perfect it doesn't feel perfect.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, yeah, Casual just said, always add some randomness to make it less perfect. And I
Yeah,
actually, I think that in certain cases that is definitely a really good idea. But although I am, like, I feel like if it was like a combat system and you had randomness to a combat system, like, especially like a sword attack, it might feel a bit scuffed. And that's where the whole RNG issue comes in, where, people are like, the whole debate of whether RNG should be a thing or not. There's so much, there's so much like little intricacies that are in game development that people hate or they don't hate, or you have people that really love it or don't love it.
yeah,
It's weird. The thing is, you can't please everyone in game development. And that, with the final product, um, not everyone's going to enjoy it, and that's the art of the human psyche, is that everyone finds enjoyment in different things. Like, in your game, people, you'll focus maybe on the combat and stuff, but you may find that there are people that actually just like exploring rather than just the combating. They may not like combat, not necessarily because it's bad, but because they don't want to combat. It's like with the whole Minecraft, the whole Minecraft phenomenon is that there are so many ways to play that game, and that's why it's probably been such a success. You can explore, you can fight, you can do whatever, you can build. There's so many options, and that's probably why the game has become as big as it has been. It appeases to so many audiences, not just like
yeah.
one audience. And again, people's definition of perfect is different for everyone, you know um
Yeah, that's kind of what I feel like. There's a saying that's like get your system to 80% and then move on. And once all your systems are 80%, whoops, I'm sorry. Once all your systems are 80%, go back and add in that 20% or polish it up a little bit here and there, just so you're not stuck in this perfectionist mindset where you're like, oh, it's not perfect yet. It's not 100%, because in reality, it's probably only ever going to be 98, 99% perfect, or not even
yeah,
that close, like 95.
yeah,
And that should be good enough. Even if a system's like 80%, it should be good enough to release.
yeah. And there are gonna be people that see that perfection as 70% or 100%, and that's the really important part about playtesting and getting playtesters in, is that you can get an average on how many people enjoyed certain aspects of the game. Like, a good idea or a good thing to do with playtesting is have people fill out a survey afterwards, because that, like, quantitative data is super helpful with game development. Like, you know that there's so many choices that I mean, so many like factors that go into playtesting that people often overlook. Like sometimes people just give someone a game and it's like, they don't tell you anything to do with it. And I think that is a really, really negative thing to do. Like, it's a really bad choice to just hand someone a game key and just say, play the game, because
Yeah,
chances are they're probably gonna be like, okay, well, I play tested it. Here are some things that could be improved on, and then they won't play test it again. Because I feel like you have to engage your playtesters and make them feel like they're a part of a bigger picture. Um,
yeah,
and you're treating them like they're not just your, I guess, fans or community, but they're, working for you in a way, and they feel like they're a bigger part of your
yeah,
of your development team and stuff. And that's a really important thing. And I think something that I wish we had done before with our previous game, and I definitely think that this game, when we get into playtesting, we're gonna have this long ass survey that people are they're gonna destroy their brains. But once they fill it in, they'll be like, "Wow, that's that made me feel
yeah,
like I made an impact." And you know, uh, Peter or Casual Dutchman has just said, "Depends. Some play tests to see if players can play the game without you also need to happen sometimes." Yeah, well, I'm not saying like necessarily guide the player. I'm just saying right at the end, you ask the player not necessarily just what they thought, but ask them to fill something in, because like it really helps them to make them feel like they're not just players. And I think
yeah.
that's an important part that I didn't really think of until now, to be honest. Like I've thought about it a little bit in the past, but not to an extent of actually thinking, actually, that could be quite helpful.
Yeah, I feel like the other thing with not just a survey is asking people, which not everyone would be interested in, but like recording them their like first playthrough in
Yes.
just a video, not even editing anything. Because people can say, "Oh, I loved your game. This was perfect." But then you watch a video and they struggled opening the inventory, which a lot of people in my first phase had problems with, which was a big oversight. But you can notice that and you can fix that a lot faster rather than someone's like, "Oh, I love your whole game," and they might just be too lazy to tell you what actually was causing problems.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, Excelsior Studios just said game developers need to find a balance between forcing, guiding, and letting the players do tasks. Yeah, yeah. I think that's a big thing with tutorials as well, is giving a player a block of text. That's a no go no matter what. Like, that's a game jam thing that you would
Yeah,
maybe do if you run out of time. But if you can really avoid it, having interactive like tutorials is super vital. And I think it's something that's actually surprisingly overlooked a lot. Like, nobody
yeah.
really wants to press the how to play button. Like, I don't think out of all the time that I've ever played games, if I see a how to play button, I'm gonna be like, I don't need a tutorial, and then I'm like, what do I do?
And
And
then you think the game is just terrible, but then you just don't know how to play the game,
yeah,
so
yeah, yeah. No, it's a weird sort of juggling act as a game developer. I think that's
see, like,
that's
fully fleshed out games that have a how to play button, and it's just like a book of how to play the game, and I'm like, "Why do I wanna pay money to read a book to just play the game?"
yeah, yeah. It's a real weird thing. Like, that's especially a thing with like strategy games. Like that, a lot of their stuff is just you know like you have to read up on a lot of the stuff that goes into
Yeah,
strategy games. But I think that's where an exception lies, because people in strategy games, they really like reading, but
yeah.
like, well, just reading, like reading the numbers, reading the environment, stuff like that. Um, yeah, Tom's just said, just have a hologram version of you in the game. You know what? I think that might be a good idea.
I'm just gonna record a video of me reading the how to play and just force people to
You-
listen
You've
to
got
the entire video.
yeah, you've got to make sure they can't skip. and
Yep.
that you speak in a very monotone voice, and it sounds like you've just got up out of bed, and it's got to be recorded on a phone, so it's really crappy quality. And
Yeah,
then that is a perfect tutorial.
it also has to be, like, overly long, like, every, like, few minutes, you're like, "Oh, it's gotta end now, it's gotta end now," but then it just never ends.
Yeah, you just reading. You've just got to scroll. Like like SpongeBob, where it's just
Yeah.
like an infinitely scrolling like thing. You just imagine it. It's like writing like a devlog script, and you're like, oh, I've written too much. Delete.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I've had to do that a few times where you just, like, write a devlog and then you realize, like, the video's gonna be, like, 20 minutes long and you just
yeah.
start deleting.
Yeah, like the problem with us is like when you're early on in the game, there's not much to show. So you can't really have like a 10-minute devlog because if you have a 10-minute devlog of this gray, people are gonna get so bored. You have to just have like, it's 5-minute devlog and stick to that because honestly, it's so easy to just get bogged down in it. But the thing is,
Yeah.
you don't have enough footage because there's not enough of the game there.
You could spend, like, 5 minutes talking about every problem you got encountered while making a system, but then the system is like, "I made my player move a box," and you're like, "Well, I can only show them moving a box so many times
Yeah.
before they just get bored."
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Yeah, Madbook just said also adhering to game design typical practices. WSA&D is so ingrained into players' mind, they have a different way of controlling the game. People are going to need extra help to understand. Yeah, exactly. Um, Tom's just asked, that's why you added the sus red boys, right? Yeah, no, it's not because we don't have any artwork for them or anything. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it's definitely a fun part of game development though. Like when you think about it, you're like, oh god, a tutorial. That feels like the most boring thing in the world. But it helps you really learn a lot about, what makes your game stand out and stuff. Um, when you're thinking about things that really add to your game and things that are important and integral to your game, and you're writing about it, you're like, wow, not too bad. But yeah,
yeah. Um, but did you kinda wanna go into level design for the
yep,
what are the last topics? Because I know I've been doing level design for probably about close to a month now, and I feel like it is so, so important to nail down your level design if you want your mechanics to actually stand out.
yeah, no, yeah. Sorry, I'm just laughing because I'm doing level design and it's going interestingly. Like I don't know, it's one of those things that I feel like I like, but when I get into it, I'm like I hate this so much. It's awful.
What's worse when you, like, make something you're really proud of, and then someone named Excelsior Studios messages you with some screenshots that look like 5 times better than what you're, of what you made, and now you're like, "Well, do I just remake everything to make it look better, or do I just keep going and just slowly, cry myself to
Yeah,
sleep,
yeah.
seeing that there's this game that looks so much better?"
Yeah, like
So,
there's only so many Gamma Sutra articles I can read, okay? Like I can't read too many.
yeah, I've been struggling with one of the parts is making the camps for my game look fun and being fun, while at the same time being interactable, because a big part of Windshire is the interactability between traps and different game objects together. And that's something I'm focused on right now. But having those systems in, but not having them in the level design, or just kind of like having them as an afterthought, I realized actually hurt the game a lot more. So before I start on a camp design, I sit down with a whiteboard and I just start putting. I first lay out the design as in like the out boundaries of the orc camp,
Hmm.
and once I get that done, I start implementing the main mechanics and how do I want the player to be able to, I don't know, like I would place this barrel right here, which would be able to explode and cause this trap to fall on this orc or something like that. So if the player actually wants to go about like just so there's my interaction systems aren't an afterthought and exploding a barrel wouldn't do anything. Rather, if you took the time and studied those orc camps, which is something I want to start reinforcing in my game, is studying the orc camps before you just go in guns blazing, then that way you're going to be able to actually use these systems I've made and spent time on in a actual useful way to progress in the game.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm just like the more we're talking about level design, the more I'm like, oh, like that's the focus for this week. It's just so hard to get motivation for it because it's just like uh, it's so monotonous when you're first starting out with it. Like the first couple of days when you're starting it, you're like, oh my God, this white box thing's getting really boring now. Like, yeah, no, it's just I think it's like there's so many things that go into level design that you don't even think of, and then it's so easy to remember, like, or to feel like you have to make it perfect and stuff. Like again, the whole perfectionist thing is that you're just trying to get perfect all the time, and you can't.
I feel like the only time I have motivation to do level design is when I am forced into an hour and 15-minute class that the teacher's not talking, I'm not talking, everyone has their cameras off, but we can't leave for some reason. Don't ask me. It's a really
Oh no,
weird,
no,
like,
we have the same. Like literally nobody's talking, we just have to wait.
yeah, we have to wait until 1:30 to be let go and I can leave the meeting or you're counted absent. So I just sit there with my camera off just doing level design because I know that I can't really do much else because if the teacher starts talking or I need to do something, I don't like leaving mid-system. So level design is kind of like that perfect filler for
Yeah,
that class.
yeah, yeah. Well, like for our game, like we're hoping that you know like maybe for early access, I don't know yet, but for early access, we're hoping for at least like the first like storyline to be done, and
Mm.
you know I'm designing level 3 because level 2 is being designed by my business partner, and it's like it's really weird making a making a sequel to a level that hasn't been made yet. It's really confusing. It's like what am I supposed to do?
How does that work? Do you guys have any like plans for what level
Yeah,
1 is
no.
supposed to be?
Like when I say plans, the only plans we've got one line for each level, and I'm not even joking. One line is the whole level. Like it's it just says in brackets the setting, and then a comma and a space, and then what type of mission it is, and that's it. It's yeah, the planning is kind of shoddy, but it's enough to the point that I can expand upon it.
Yeah,
Like we know that the first level is introducing the banana mutants in a supermarket. They're taking over the supermarket, and then second level they're invading the city, and then a third level it's like the boat port because they're trying to stop people from leaving and stop people importing bananas and stuff. It sounds really wacky, and that's the point. That's the point. Um,
uh,
but we do know what we sort of want for the storyline, so that I think that's integral to level design, especially when you're doing it linearly, is that you have like an overarching idea of like the beginning, middle, end sort of thing. Like this is
yeah.
sort of the middle level, and I'm my brain is like I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing because I sort of have an idea, but like oh my God, it is a weird thing to be doing. Like I don't know. I knew I had to do level design going into it, and I was like, oh yeah, I can do that. And now I'm doing it. I'm like, lighting, uh, leading lines, colors. There you go, boom.
Oh, you see, that's kind of the difference right now is that you're kind of stuck to a level design, as in you make a level a single level and it's enclosed maybe, but
Yeah.
I'm facing a problem where
Yours is open world.
it's open world and I can't like direct the player on where to go.
Oof.
And that's a problem I'm facing right now because
Yeah,
um
you gotta make the world fresh and
yeah,
exciting wherever they go.
it, it gets worse when you realize that Windshire won't be having traditional quests. As in it is going
Oh
to
no.
have it's not gonna have, like, go to this spot, it is gonna be more of an open world-based questing system, which is even worse, but it is simpler to implement, which is a reason, and it also fits the kind of the sandbox feel of our game we're
Yeah,
going for.
yeah, yeah.
But it just gets into this as, like, how do I tell the player where to go without him going to a spot that's just full of trees? And
Yeah.
it's like, do I just make a orc camp every 5 feet so it's more interesting
Well, I
or
guess like smoke in the air sort of thing
yeah,
would give a player a direction of, you know, where certain enemies are. But yeah,
yeah.
no, that sounds like hell, and I'm glad I'm not doing that.
It's even worse
But
that, like, I refuse to have filler forests, as in, I will not have a
yeah,
forest in this game that is just blocked off and you can't go in because it's open world. What's the point of having forests so thick that you can't do combat or you can't move around in? So now I have about like 2 kilometers squared of what am I supposed to add onto this island?
hmm.
And I've already plotted out where all the towns and the camps are, and then I'm like, what am I supposed to do with like half of the map now?
Yeah, that
So
is. It's a weird. Like level design is one of those things that is really oversighted. Like
yeah,
when you first start game development and you're doing game jams or whatever it is, like small games, you don't give two shits about like level design. It doesn't matter. Whereas when you like, go over onto doing like a bigger game, you've got to make bigger levels. And you're like, oh,
yeah,
that's terrifying. Like, it doesn't matter how many articles I read. I'm just like, I tell you what, that is boring. Like, you know, I streamed on Tuesday on our Twitch channel, and I was planning out this level. I was doing it on like an online whiteboard thing, and like I was doing, I was just placing them along, and I really didn't really care, if I'm honest with you. I didn't really care what it was like, sort of like. I just wanted the sort of environment idea down rather than the actual level design, which kind of doesn't make much sense. But like, I wanted to, because I feel like if you plan out something on like paper or whatever, you're gonna change that immediately anyway. Like the thing that you planned, you're just gonna completely just alter in 2 days anyway. So just sort of doing it in Unity and seeing it in a 3D space is a lot easier to add on to, I find. Like,
yeah.
yeah. And Madbook's just said, like, how does Breath of the Wild keep stuff interesting between towns and moblin camps? I think he meant to say goblin camps, but, you know. Uh,
I feel like the one thing that I remember playing Breath of the Wild, the start of it, I played a lot of it, but I just remember the start the most because I played it like 6 times, and then I decided I'm like I'm gonna finally get through the starting area. So it's just like honestly, I feel like the only thing that kept me interested was like the glider
mhm.
and the horses and just fighting random things in between those towns and camps. Right, and then like as you go to progress through the game, like having those like encounters in between the main objectives or when you're traveling is kind of what kept it fresh and entertaining.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a, like, I don't know. It's so terrifying. Like when someone mentions level design, it's terrifying, and it feels a lot scarier than what it actually is. Like I feel like level design is one of those things that in game development where you just sort of, you get scared of it, but when you actually do it, it's a lot easier. And like level design is one of those things that's like you sort of hesitate with it quite a lot because you don't know exactly how to do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, and that's kind of another part of level design is just the verticality is
Mm.
something I completely ignored. And then as you do your level and you play your game, and then you realize you're basically playing on a super flat Minecraft world with trees, then that becomes a problem. And not only with that, but I feel like a lot of games optimize their game a lot by using what do you call it, verticality to hide different objects, and that's something I never knew. So I'm like, why don't my 50 million trees run better? I'm like, well, there it's because every single 50 million trees is being rendered at the exact same time.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's something you gotta keep in mind is just verticality also makes the level design feel so much better
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
realistic.
Yeah, no, it's such a difficult process because you see, people can give you tips and tricks on level design like for hours and hours and hours, but until you actually get into it, you do not know a clue on what you're doing. Like it's like an art, right? It's like making like an art piece. Not that I can do that, but it's like making artwork, right? Until you actually get down into drawing, you
Yeah,
cannot draw, right? Like people can give you tips on how to draw a perfect circle or whatever it is, but until you actually draw that perfect circle, you're not gonna actually know what to do. You're just gonna know fundamentals, and that
yeah,
goes for a lot of things in game development. Like network programming, for example. Like knowing the fundamentals of network programming is important to knowing how to actually make the program. So that goes for actually everything in programming ever, and it can transfer between everything. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, no, I'm just I'm just dreading these next few days because I need to get enough footage for the devlog, and honestly, it's I have no idea how on earth you get 5 minutes of footage of you making a level, because I'll be honest, right? If I'm watching a YouTube video and they're making a level for 5 minutes, I'm out. I'm getting bored. That's the problem with devlogs, is that the pacing's got to feel right. And if you're speaking for more than 2.5 minutes, I'd say people get bored. Like, if you're speaking more than 2.5 minutes on one thing, people are just going to probably leave. And that's the real hard truth of it.
Recently realized that because as I went back through a few of my videos when I used to go more in depth, you can definitely see that spike of people just double tapping on their phone or pressing the arrow key just to skip you talking.
Yeah,
Because at the end of the day, if you're not a game developer, people don't really care how it's done unless they're interested in that. And I feel like some game people who watch devlogs are, but some of them are, um, just more, like, interested in seeing the progression of the game
yeah.
without all the technical, like, "Well, I
Mumbo
added
jumbo,
an if
yeah.
statement here," or something like that,
And
so
you're
you gotta.
like, what is an if statement?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. They're
yeah.
just like, "Well, I'm bored."
Yeah,
So,
like when I'm watching devlogs, usually it's a break from game development, so I don't really give I don't really care about like people's how people
yeah.
have implemented a system. Sometimes I appreciate it because sometimes people will mention it, and then I'll go back to that video and watch it again. But on most occasions, if I'm just scrolling through YouTube and I see a devlog, and when I scroll through YouTube, most of the time it's for a break. And when it is, I don't really want to be reminded of game development even more, because
Yeah.
then it's like, oh god, I gotta do that level design.
Oh, yeah, that's kind of where I kind of gotta get better at, and I feel like I've been improving, is just
Yeah,
shutting up about the technical side and
yeah,
showing more flashy, more entertaining.
yeah.
Like,
And that
when
is a really tough thing to do.
it
it's
is.
it's so tough because there's only so much you can show off without it getting dull.
Yeah.
You know, it is a really, really boring thing to watch when someone's just watching a bunch of grey boxes and stuff. Like that's
Yeah.
especially the problem we're facing now, or I'm facing because I'm editing the videos. I'm like, oh my god, they're just boxes at the moment. How on earth do I make that like at least a bit entertaining? It's really tough. But yeah,
Yeah. That's kind of I don't know. I'm still struggling with that because I personally find it really it's not like I'm the most in like I find it interesting when people just go on about the technical side, but it's more like I'm proud that I got this done and I want to share what struggles I faced in it.
Hmm.
But then you got to realize no one cares other than you. And that's
Yeah,
just kind of the cold hard facts. And until you realize that your retention of people watching those videos are just going to continuously go down and down until you just slow down on the technical
yeah,
side,
yeah,
which kind of is sad because a lot of our game dev, I personally do like seeing some technical side because I know there's a few devlogs where I'm like, oh, I'm actually making this type of system. What was their approach to it? And that's
yeah,
something I
yeah,
find respectable.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, it's been really great having you on today, Daniel. We've been speaking for an hour and 20 somehow. That time really flew by. Um,
yeah.
but yeah, no, it's been really fun talking to you. And yeah, I wish you all the best with Windshire. I'm excited to see more devlogs, and especially the one that's coming out, or is it out?
It's gonna be coming out. I gotta just finish typing up the description. So
Yeah, well,
yeah,
I'm excited to watch it because yeah, I like your devlogs. They're quite chill. But yeah,
yeah.
so
Thank you,
thanks so much for watching again.
thank
To
you for letting
everyone,
me
and
on. It was a really
yeah,
fun experience.
it was indeed.
Um, I can't wait to see your level designs.
Oh, don't
That's
say
gonna be
that.
an interesting
Don't say
devlog.
that. Don't say that.
Don't do that. But yeah, I've had a great time here. I just want to thank everyone for tuning in too.
Mhm.
They've been an interesting conversation with everyone. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next week on the 19th. Yeah, the 19th of March, where I'll be talking to Soul. Games by Soul, that is, in case anyone was wondering. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll speak to you later. Bye, guys.